John Locke. John Locke was a famous philosopher who lived in the 17th century, and he lived in England, and he lived during the end of the 17th century, and during the time when King James II of England was being kicked out of England and overthrown in favour of his daughter Mary and her husband, who was William of Orange, who became King William III of England. And earlier in that century, England had had a civil war where King Charles I had been overthrown, beheaded, and England had become a republic for 10 years before restoring the monarchy. And during this period, people had been questioning and challenging the king, and some political conflict had been going on, an argument between the idea that the king is the boss of everything and can do what he wants, against other people who are saying, no, he can't just do what he wants. The people have some rights, and we can rebel and have a revolution. And the only reason why I'm explaining this small historical background is because it's very important to the meat and vegetables of what Locke is all about. Right. So John Locke was an English philosopher, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Locke is famous for two different types of philosophy. He wrote what you would consider political philosophy, writing about kings and governments and rights of people to choose their governments and all that kind of stuff. And then he also wrote more traditional philosophy, the kind of stuff about the world, what exists, what is the meaning of life, etc., etc. And so Locke had sort of two hats. He had the hat of political philosophy and the hat of traditional abstract philosophy. And he was very important in both fields. So we'll start with the political philosophy first and then move on to the abstract stuff second. So if you find philosophy shit, but you like politics, then you can quit halfway through. So kings during this time were subscribing to the idea of divine right of kings, and divine right of kings is the idea that kings are chosen by God, and God has put these people on earth with the right to rule nations and to tell those nations what to do and have complete control, and that people, mere human beings, do not have any right or power to challenge kings because kings are put there by God. And there was some cunt, I think his name was Robert Filmer, but I might be wrong, who wrote about this in the 17th century. And another philosopher called Thomas Hobbes had written something similar, but his idea was more philosophical, deeper than that. His idea was that governments and rulers and kings, no matter what kind they are, they can do whatever the fuck they want, because any government at all is better than no government, because you have no government and people doing whatever they want all the time, and chaos and craziness, then that's going to be shit for everyone, and everyone's going to be fucked. So you can't be challenging your leader. You've got to put up with them, however shit they are, because however shit a leader is better than no leader. So you got to keep your mouth shut. That was Hobbes, but Hobbes is not that relevant for Locke, even though a lot of people talk about them together because they kind of have opposite opinions about things. But Locke wasn't really concerned with Hobbes. He hadn't read Hobbes, or he didn't give a fuck about Hobbes, or didn't think Hobbes was worth talking about. But Locke did read this Filmer guy, if that's his name, and the idea of divine right of kings, which Locke thought was a bunch of bollocks. So Locke Locke's book, in which he writes about politics, is called The Two Treaties of Government. The first treatise of that book is, or treatise means like argument, where so it's two arguments. And the first bit, he talks about Robert Filmer's book and how it's a load of bollocks, and he rips it apart, and he looks at all the arguments that Filmer makes about how God made it so that kings have all the power and gives them the power. And he ripped it apart and tore it to pieces, and he said it's a load of bollocks. And he looked at the Bible, and he found passages in the Bible which contradict what Filmer was saying from his religious interpretation. And it's sort of a historiographical or literary piece of work where Locke criticizes everything that Filmer wrote in this book and says it's all fucking shit and a load of bollocks. So that's the first part of the book. The second part of the book, Locke puts forward his theory about what he thinks government is all about, and why he thinks that people have the right to change their governments if their governments are shit, and about how monarchs don't have all the power, but also about why people have the right to choose their governments and to check their governments and criticize their governments and change their governments if they want to. And it's a really revolutionary idea that he puts forward, and it's extremely influential in politics and changes everything, especially the Americans, and it really influences the American Revolution. And it's extremely important for the Enlightenment and all the ideas in the Enlightenment, especially the political ones, which come later. And it's really the ideas of this book are sort of almost universally accepted today in most countries in the world, and it's one of the principles that we kind of keep. I'm not going to go through the book and sort of go through it structurally. I'm just going to give you sort of the gist of what it's all about, because this is going to be a short video. So John Locke wrote that he felt that there's a state of nature, and the state of nature is the way that sort of everything in the world is naturally of its own accord, without people sort of creating institutions or things to change it. So, we've got money, and we use money, and we have property, and we have governments, and we have laws and things like that. And those are not things that exist in a state of nature. Those are things that exist in a society, in a civil society. A civil society is when people have come together and have created sort of systems of how they're going to do things. We're not going to just rape each other and murder each other and take shit from each other. There's going to be laws, and property, and where you're going to use money to exchange things, and this is yours and that's mine, and we have leaders that we vote for or don't vote for, or kings that we follow, and we have roads, and we have laws about which side of the road you're going to go down, and laws about you can't be murdering people and stealing. We have punishments. We have all these different systems and practices that we accept as part of living in a civil society. But a civil society is not a natural order, and it's not part of the state of nature, because if you imagine that we just were on an island somewhere, and a load of people were dropped on an island somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and they could do whatever the fuck they wanted, then people might be raping and murdering each other and whatever, and it would be chaos and craziness, And if you imagine what life might have been like back in the Stone Age, you might imagine a society where people were just running around killing each other and doing all that stuff and living like animals, and not living in a civil society. So now governments and things like that are parts of a civil society that you don't really have in a state of nature or a sort of an uncivilized society. and in nature, everyone's free. You can do whatever the fuck you want in nature. You know, there's no cunt to arrest you or tell you you can't do this or you can't do that. Maybe some cunt might get you in a headlock and, you know, pull your trousers down and make you do what he wants. But in terms of ideas and accepting that there's such a thing as property or that there's such a thing as law, they don't exist in the state of nature. So by the laws of nature, you know, you can do whatever the fuck you want, and no cunt can tell you otherwise. Um, and that's the state of nature. So everyone by nature is free to do whatever the fuck they want, basically, and that's, you know, state of nature is a state of liberty and a state of freedom. But it's not really a condition or a state that we might necessarily want to live in, because, you know, the big strong guy will kill you and steal your stuff, and, you know, there'll be loads of things that you get from a civil society which are quite good. You know, you've got laws to protect you, you've got a government to stop people from stealing your stuff, you've got a police to go around and enforce the law, and you've got systems of justice and to keep you safe and to protect you. And when someone does something wrong, you can go to the police or go to the court and get justice. And we have concepts of justice and concepts of law and legality and property and all these things that you wouldn't have in a state of nature. And, you know, people might say that living in a society, in a civil society, with all the structures and organizations that we have, are better than living in a state of nature, running around in the jungle with someone coming up and hitting you on the head with a big stick. And that's why we have civil society, and that's why we have governments, and we have governments as part of the civil society to make sure it works properly with laws and everything, and for the society to work. And the purpose of having a civil society is because that's what people want, and because having a civil society is better than living in a state of nature where people do whatever the fuck they want and the big fish eat the little fish and nobody has any rights. So it follows from this idea that governments and kings or whatever kinds of leaders you have are not there to do whatever they want. They're not there because they're the biggest fish. They are there because the society needs and wants there to be a government to protect them and give them rights and have laws to everyone's benefit. And to stop some cunt coming over and beating you over the head and raping your wife and stealing all your shit or whatever. So governments and kings have a responsibility to make sure that they actually make sure that living in a civil society gives people a better life than they would have in a state of nature. And this state of nature kind of exists in the background, because the only reason why we have governments and societies and everything is because we all collectively choose to agree that we have these things. You know, if everybody said, we don't believe in the king, or we don't believe in the society, fuck the police and all the rest of it, you could easily find that a society could deteriorate back into a state of nature again. And of course we don't want that, but also you don't want to have a civil society in which people behave as if they were in a state of nature. So if people aren't having the benefits that a civil society is supposed to give them, then they might as well go back to having a state of nature where at least they're free. So the idea is that kings and leaders and whatever, if they don't fulfill the purposes of ensuring that everyone gets, you know, a decent society with the benefits of a society, rather than state of nature, then why should people prefer living in a society to a state of nature? And why shouldn't they just say, oh, fuck it, get rid of it, and we'll have a state of nature? And John Locke's theory is called a social contract theory. Now, the social contract is like when when you get a house, or you buy a car or something, you sign a contract, or when you have a job, you sign a contract. And the contract says, well, you must do this and I must do that. And if somebody doesn't follow the rules of the contract, like if you don't turn up for work at all, or you don't get paid, then the contract can be thrown in the bin and got rid of, and then you go and get another job, or you go and buy another house, or whatever. So it's the same with society. Society is a contract between the government and the people. And the promise that is made by a government when it becomes a government is that it will protect the laws of the country, that it will uphold justice, that it will rule in the interests of the people, and that the people will benefit from living in this society and from having this government. And if they don't fulfill these things, if the king is going around sort of just stealing things from people and murdering people, or you don't get shit, and the fact that you've got a house doesn't mean for shit because they can just take it away from you, or the fact that someone murders somebody, if they're friends with the king, then they get to go free, or whatever. If all that stuff's happening, then the people will say, well, this isn't fucking working for me. This contract has been broken, and therefore we, the people, have the right to get rid of this contract and cancel it and go back to a state of nature, and then form another contract with another institution or another form of government that better suits us and does what we want, which is to protect the people with laws and systems of justice and so on. So kings and governments, whether they be kings or whether they be republics or whatever they are, they all have to follow by rights. By rights they have to respect the contract and govern in the interests of the people. And if they don't, then the people have every right to get rid of them and to replace them with another government that suits them. So that's the basic theory, and it's very influential because the American Revolution is all about that the king's a cunt, and the British rule in America doesn't actually do anything for the American people, and they'll be much better off having their own government that they choose themselves, and then they can vote for presidents, and then they can get new presidents, and also in democracy you choose your leaders, and if you don't like them, then you vote for some other cunt next time, so it's a really revolutionary idea. Yes, it's true that there was democracy in the ancient world, and that for example the Athens had democracy, but I mean, as far as government was concerned in the medieval times and in the early modern world, it was that you had kings and stuff like that, and sometimes you had republics where there was rich people in control. But the idea that the people generally have the right to choose their own governments and change them if they want to, as a right and as something that is logical and rational, as opposed to just something that can happen out of people having power, that this was very, very, very new. And also, it's the idea of representative government. So the government there represents the people rather than like the people doing everything they want all the time collectively, like in ancient Athens. But anyway, so it's the idea that basically it's the idea that people choose their governments themselves, and if they don't like the government and the government isn't fulfilling its end of the bargain, then they can be changed, and there's nothing wrong with that. And no cunt can say that that people don't have the right to change their governments. So that's the two treaties. Okay, so if you're not interested in the actual sort of more abstract philosophy stuff, and you only were interested in the political philosophy of Locke, then maybe this isn't really a video for you, and you'd like to not bother continuing with this one. So if you are interested in Locke and what the fuck he has to say about philosophy stuff, then continue with this and hear me make a lot of mistakes and tell you misinformation about it. So, John Locke and his philosophy. Now, John Locke had some interest in religion and had used religious arguments in his two treatises of government, but religion wasn't really a big thing for him. It didn't really factor into his arguments. He didn't really talk about God and stuff like that very much. So I think it's important to place Locke in the context of the two different groups of thinkers that are considered to have been at his time and just after. And they had different ideas about something which is called epistemology. And epistemology is about knowledge. What is knowledge? How the fuck do we know anything? What does it mean to know shit? And who the fuck knows anything about anything? And what is knowledge? And who the fuck can we say knows what's what? And what does it mean? Fucking going around in circles. But it's about theory of knowledge, epistemology, knowledge. I don't know fuck all. What do you know? Fucking nothing, right? So, John Locke was someone that they called an empiricist, and empiricism is one of these two thoughts, and the second thought is rationalism. And you have the two different groups, the empiricists and the rationalists. And the rationalists include René Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. And the empiricists, on the other hand, we have Locke, we have George Berkeley, and we have David Hume. And so John Locke is the first of those three. And what the fuck is empiricism about? Well, the rationalists, you know, Descartes and all those lot, they thought that you had in your mind already all the tools you need for understanding and for knowing shit, and that you had knowledge already in your head about fucking stuff to do with the world. You knew loads of stuff, and you understood the world just by existing and by having a mind, and that the mind has within itself the power and the ability to understand shit. Now, Locke and the other empiricists, but we'll start with Locke, because Locke's the first one and we're talking about Locke. So Locke said that's bollocks, and you don't fucking know shit. When you're born, you're fucking stupid and you don't know fuck all, and that there's basically nothing in your mind at all. It's a blank slate, he said. It's a tabula rasa, which is Latin for blank slate, and there's fuck all in there, and there's no fucking knowledge of anything in your mind until you experience and learn shit, and you learn shit through experience, and then you fucking know things once you've experienced them. So empiricism, it means that all of our knowledge comes from experience. And if you've never heard of Kant, then you don't know fuck all about Kant. And if you've never heard of an ostrich, then you don't know what a fucking ostrich is, and you have no idea of an ostrich. And if you've never, you've never seen the color green, you won't know what the fuck the color green is, you know. So um, empiricism means that you only learn things, you only know things by coming across them in life, or being exposed to them and experiencing them. And then once you've experienced them, then you can have an idea of what the fuck they are and how they fucking work. So yeah, John Locke wrote a fucking book, and it's called I can't remember what they can't fucking call the book now. Fucking hell. Not very good, this one, is it? Shit. Anyway, John Locke believed that all these rationalist philosophers like Descartes and that, and them, who thought that you could learn and perfect your knowledge and understanding through introspection, they were all a bunch of stupid cunts, and they were talking bollocks, and that really you could only learn things and know things by experiencing them in life and coming across them. That was the main thing about John Locke. Another thing about empiricism is that it is all about experience, and and fuck. Anyway, I'm going to stop there because I'm getting stuck.